We're back now with our politics panel. Susan Page is Washington bureau chief at USA Today. Reihan Salam is the executive editor of the National Review. Ruth Marcus is a columnist at the Washington Post. And Jonathan Martin is national political correspondent for the New York Times. Susan, I want to start with you. Where is the Republican race now as you see it?
You know, John Kasich told you in your interview that there had been 10 contested conventions and that only 3 of them went with the front runner. But there's been 1 contested convention since we went to the modern primary system, and it went with the front runner going into the convention. That was Gerald Ford in 1976. Like it or not, Donald Trump is likely to be the Republican nominee for president, and that can be a really messy convention or can be a relatively smooth convention. But the fact is, he is by far the most likely nominee going at this moment.
But we're not going to know until California, probably, which is the last day of voting, June 7th, when California and New Jersey, 2 large states, will cast their ballots. In California is district by district, which means that with the possibility of the GOP race, John, coming down to a Ted Cruz, John Kasich, Donald Trump battle, the heartland of Santa Monica, Marin County, real red America, could decide who the next GOP nominee is.
Right. Reihan, what if you are not certain about Donald Trump or you're actively trying to work against him, where does the smart activity go? Do you get behind Kasich? Do you ask Kasich to drop out? What's your...
Look, Kasich has a lot of decent qualities. He is someone who would fare well in a general election. He's from the Midwest. He's from a big swing state. It's also true that it is impossible for him to win. And the idea that he is going to be the one coming out of a brokered convention is just defies comprehension. It speaks to a level of self-delusion that, if there have been a lot of delusional candidates in this race, Ted Cruz is very flawed, but what is also true is that he has a very strong, consistent position on immigration. One can imagine some of the voters that Donald Trump has energized going along with Ted Cruz. It is very hard to imagine many other Republicans pulling that off. And the other difficulty is that conservatives have to move on a parallel track, which is thinking hard about a minor party race as well, and doing both of those things at once, trying to deny Trump the nomination while also trying to organize outside of the party, if necessary, to give conservatives a place to vote, is going to be really challenging.
So you mean a third party creation. Ruth, Donald Trump is meeting with some Washington Republicans this week. He's talking about phone calls with Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan and unity. What about those Republicans who are getting to yes with Donald Trump?
Well, there are some Republicans getting to yes with Donald Trump, but there are a lot of Republicans getting to OMG with Donald Trump. And I think we need to sort of pause and appreciate the pigs flying moment that we're in right now. To have Lindsey Graham endorsing Ted Cruz.
Because of all the things he said that have not been complimentary.
To have the Republican establishment, which Ted Cruz has spent his entire time in Washington and before kicking in the teeth, now trying to coalesce around Ted Cruz, is pretty remarkable. The Trump outreach to the establishment is interesting, but what we see with Trump is there's kind of one part outreach and then 2 steps of, there'll be riots and, just behavior and comments that are just not acceptable to the Republican establishment. One really quick thing, I find the third party piece, and I know you guys wrote about it, very far-fetched. The ballot access rules make it very difficult to mount a serious third-party challenge.
Add one fast point there. It is very difficult to get somebody on the ballot to run as an independent, which is why what they're looking at doing is basically piggybacking on one of the minor parties, Libertarians, Constitution, that already have ballot access. And doing that, it makes it a little bit easier. It's still certainly a long ball, perhaps even a Hail Mary, but if you do it with a party that already exists, it's a little bit easier.
Would the parties that already exist allow themselves to be the host
and that's
of a
the other
Republican Party? That's
the other challenge, too, is you have to convince them that that's what you're doing. But this is
and to what end? What's the goal?
To stop Trump from winning the presidency.
And then what happens?
Well you deny him the presidency,
it's about a fifth
and possibly throw it to the House.
About a fifth to a quarter of Republicans who will not vote for Donald Trump, who are simply not going to turn out for him. When you think about down ballot races, when you think about the party apparatus going forward, it is not obvious that this third party bid would not actually be a vessel for the party that's to come. Because another thing, that Frank pointed out earlier, is that if you look at young people, 18 to 29 voters, they choose Bernie Sanders by a wide margin over the Republican field. The Republican Party needs to think around the bend. Donald Trump has he's energized a lot of voters who are frankly not going to be the voters of the future.
This discussion, though, underscores underscores why the Stop Trump movement has gone nowhere. There's not a candidate that's acceptable. There's not a strategy that works. The Republicans I've talked to off the record, Republican officials here in town, think they're going to lose in November. And the strategy, is there a way to lose the presidency but hold the Senate? Is there a way to lose the White House and the Senate but not have the party destroyed? And that is the discussion going on. And they are not of one mind of whether Ted Cruz or Donald Trump is the smarter bet if what you're thinking about is post-2016.
Well, you know, I asked Senator Graham this question, the gap between what they say privately and what they're willing to do public, and the gap is vast.
Yes, but there is a way to stop Donald Trump. The problem is that they are divided between two candidates trying to stop him. And it's a very familiar divide. It's the pre-Trump divide. It's almost quaint now, establishment and conservative. And they can't figure out who should stop him. And it's hard for these folks in the party to get behind Ted Cruz. Mitt Romney and Lindsey Graham are trying to make it easier, but it's still very difficult.
Neither one of them would say the word endorse when they talked about Ted Cruz.
The state of the GOP in March of 2016 is, we have to lose with Cruz. It's important. I mean, that's astonishing, right? That they are trying to save their party by nominating somebody that they assume will lose the presidency.
Yeah, and at the same time, I think that the notion, I kind of disagree with Frank that Donald Trump would be a less strong candidate against Hillary Clinton than Ted Cruz. I think that the Clinton campaign is quite nervous about the prospect of running against Donald Trump.
Because why?
Because who knows?
The unknown.
Because the Rust Belt, because all those downscale white guys, who knows what, with Ted Cruz, sort of where he's going and what he's going to say. You don't know that with Donald Trump, and you don't know what voters he can energize.
I was shocked to see Lindsey Graham, by the way, willing to die on the Hill of Gang of Eight style comprehensive immigration reform. I mean, so, to his credit, he is willing to get behind someone like Ted Cruz. But it is incredible to see that a position that is rejected by a large majority of Republicans, he is still willing to die on that hill. And again, it's not just about illegal immigration. It's also larger concerns about what is the right immigration strategy for the future of this country. And that is something that, if the whole effort to stop Trump becomes associated with what you might call Grahamism or Ryanism, that's going to be a problem, and that's an opportunity for Ted Cruz.
Well, that's right. You're pointing out the contradiction here between here you have somebody who believes in comprehensive immigration reform, which Ted Cruz adamantly does not, nevertheless being a person who's saying Ted Cruz should be the nominee.
Yeah, and it's a mixed message.
Pigs are still in the air here.
More to come.
Susan, yeah, right.
There's launching right now.
Susan, let me ask you this question. Donald Trump said there would be riots if the nomination were taken from him, and that was seen as as a kind of incendiary thing. But isn't he right?
Both things are right. It's an incendiary thing to say, not something we've heard our political leaders say before, and he is right. I mean, if Donald Trump goes to the convention just shy of 1237, but having won the most states, having won by far the most delegates, by getting the most votes, do you think that they're going to go away quietly saying, oh, well, okay, a Cruz Kasich ticket, that makes a lot of sense for the GOP? No, there's going to be trouble. And I think one of the most disheartening things that we've seen is the continuing and escalating violence at Trump rallies by protesters and by the Trump forces against the protesters. And I think Donald Trump should think twice about continuing to fuel that particular fire.
Ruth, let me, switching to the Democrats, ask you this question. If people blocked the road to an Obama event in 2008, what would the Democratic reaction have been to that? The way they blocked the road to the Trump event?
I think you know the answer to your question, and I'm not. And I'd like to say that.
Which is what? Sorry, in case people at home don't.
Which is, Democrats would have been outraged at the notion of people blocking access to Obama events. And I think that actually there is a role for protests, but there also needs to be space, and we've talked about it before with respect to the Black Lives Matter movement and stopping Sanders from speaking. There has to be space for Trump to relay his message, as odious as it is, and there is appropriate space and time for protesters to disagree with that message without squelching it entirely.